I woke up that chilly September morning with no clue that my life was about to get upended by the local HOA, specifically by Karen, our self-appointed neighborhood tyrant. Before I plunge into the roller coaster of unexpected notices, tense showdowns, and a jaw-dropping twist about her unpaid mortgage, let me just say, if you love hearing about HOA drama and power-hungry neighbors getting their comeuppance, be sure to like this video, subscribe to Tailflow, and share your own wild HOA stories in the comments. You will not believe how Karen tried to evict me from my very own home, only to find herself on the curb instead. I'd only been in the neighborhood for a little over a year at that point. My house was one of those modest brick ranches on the southern edge of the cul-de-sac, nothing too fancy, but comfortable enough for me and my rescue dog, Milo. I remember the first few months as peaceful. The block was full of well-kept lawns, half the houses had little decorative flags, and kids rode bikes on the wide sidewalks. The homeowners association, from what I understood, mostly handled landscaping in the common areas. They'd send out newsletters about upcoming beautification days or reminders to keep trash bins hidden. No big deal. Then Karen got elected HOA president. Suddenly, I started getting the weirdest notices. A letter about my grass being half an inch too tall. A flyer taped to my door warning me about non-compliant mailbox designs. I'd glance at other mailboxes on the street. Many looked older or in worse shape than mine, yet I seemed to be singled out. I chalked it up to bad luck, or maybe Karen disliked the color scheme of my property. My yard used to have a lot of wildflowers growing near the fence, and maybe she saw them as weeds. Either way, the pressure ramped up. A few of my neighbors commiserated. One older man said Karen had sent him a $50 fine because his porch light was the wrong wattage. Another neighbor mentioned she'd caught Karen creeping around backyards, measuring fence heights with a tape measure. It was clear she enjoyed control. But I never expected her to go so far as to claim I had violated community standards to such a degree that my house could be seized. The trouble began in earnest one Friday afternoon. I just returned from a long day at work and found a thick envelope wedged in my mailbox, stamped with the HOA's official logo. I opened it while standing in the driveway, adrenaline spiking as I read. The letter basically said I was in gross violation of multiple rules, something about improper landscaping, having a dog that might be an unapproved breed, and a suspicious note accusing me of unlawful modifications to the interior of my house. The kicker was the last line. Failure to remedy these issues may result in legal action, up to and including eviction from the property. Eviction from a home I owned outright, mortgage paid in full, thanks to an inheritance from my late grandmother. I couldn't wrap my head around it. HOAs can impose fines or place a lien if you owe them money, but they certainly can't just evict you without due process, especially if you have no outstanding mortgage. I reread the letter, then rummaged through the rest of my mail. Sure enough, there was a separate note, stating I had 14 days to cure the violations or face further proceedings. My stomach churned and Milo barked at me, sensing my distress. I marched into the house, dropped my bags, and immediately began calling the HOA's office. A recorded message told me their hours were 9 to 4, Monday through Thursday. Of course, it was Friday, so no luck there. I fired off a polite but firm email to the general HOA inbox, asking for a detailed explanation. I also texted a neighbor friend, Alex, who'd had run-ins with Karen. He told me Karen had pulled something similar on another family a few streets over, mailed them a barrage of notices, threatened legal action, but eventually backed off when they proved the claims were baseless. However, something about my letter felt more extreme, more personal. Maybe Karen felt emboldened because I lived alone, or maybe she'd noticed I rarely showed up at HOA meetings and assumed I was an easy target. I spent most of that weekend in a cold sweat, imagining the worst. What if she found a loophole to kick me out? The sheer audacity of it seemed impossible, but I'd heard horror stories about HOAs gone rogue. Monday rolled around and I arrived at the HOA's tiny office just after lunch. The door squeaked as I entered, revealing a cramped space lined with filing cabinets. A bored-looking receptionist barely glanced up. I introduced myself, explained I'd gotten a notice about eviction, and asked to speak to whoever was in charge. The receptionist perked up at the mention of eviction. "Oh, that must be Karen's letter. She's in a meeting right now, but I'll see if she can spare a moment." She disappeared through a back door, leaving me to pace nervously. A few minutes later, Karen herself emerged, looking every bit the stereotypical suburban overlord, meticulously styled blonde hair, a crisp blouse, and an expression of permanent disapproval. She clutched a clipboard in one hand, a pen in the other. "You must be here about the compliance notice," she said in a tone that implied I was wasting her time. I handed her the letter. "Yes, I want to know what these alleged violations are." She flipped through some pages on her clipboard. Grass exceeding recommended height, unauthorized dog breed, possible unapproved renovations. Her voice trailed off as she read. "It's all here." When I challenged her, explaining I'd read the HOA bylaws front to back, she dismissed me with a wave. "We've updated certain guidelines, perhaps you're not aware. And about your dog, I have reason to believe you never filed the correct paperwork. You're in breach of contract with the association." The association didn't have a contract with me about dog breeds, and I'd lived here with Milo for over a year without issue. I tried to remain calm, but she was so curt, so certain of her authority. When I pressed about the threat of eviction, she claimed, "We have a right to enforce community standards. If you don't comply, we can escalate." I left that office furious. It was one thing for Karen to whine about my lawn or mailbox, but threatening eviction was a different beast altogether. That same day, I booked an appointment with a real estate attorney, a friend of a friend who agreed to look over my documents. She confirmed what I suspected. An HOA can't simply evict a homeowner, especially one without an outstanding mortgage. They can place liens or levy fines, but forcibly removing me wasn't within their normal scope. "She might be bluffing," the attorney said, "but keep everything in writing and don't give in to intimidation." Over the next week, I tried to gather as much evidence as possible. I measured my grass, it was well within city code, found the original paperwork proving Milo was a mixed breed with no restrictions, and took photos of my house's interior to show I hadn't done any major remodeling that would require HOA approval. I emailed Karen these materials. Her response: another letter doubling down on the claims, insinuating that if I didn't voluntarily leave, the HOA might consider legal action. She cited some obscure bylaw about community well-being that I couldn't find anywhere in the official documents. That's when my friend Alex dropped a bombshell. "I heard Karen might be having financial troubles. My cousin works at a local bank and mentioned something about late mortgage payments for someone in the neighborhood. Not 100% sure it's her, but the rumors going around." The irony was delicious. Here was this woman threatening to evict me, and she might not even be paying her own mortgage. Curiosity piqued, I started discreetly asking neighbors if they'd heard similar rumors. One or two nodded, saying they seen a pile of envelopes on her porch marked urgent from some loan service. Another claimed she'd gone on a rant about high interest rates at the last HOA meeting. If Karen really was behind on her mortgage, it meant the bank, not the HOA, would be the one with eviction power, but for her own house. My mind spun with the possibilities. Would she be so brazen as to chase people out of the neighborhood to deflect attention from her own situation? I dug deeper, rummaging through online property records. Nothing conclusive popped up, but I did find some suspicious clues. Her property had multiple liens in the past from unpaid contractors, and there was a note about a notice of default recorded by the county a few months back. It wasn't proof she was currently behind, but it was enough to suspect something was amiss. While I researched Karen, her intimidation campaign kicked into overdrive. She posted a notice on the community message board listing me among residents who fail to uphold standards. She told neighbors I was endangering property values. A neighbor whispered to me that Karen was claiming I'd done unlicensed construction in my attic, which was absurd. My attic was just insulation and some boxes of old holiday decorations. The stress weighed on me. Every time I heard footsteps near my front door, I expected another vile letter or a photograph pinned to my doorknob, proving some made-up violation. I met with the attorney again, who recommended I file a cease and desist letter to stop Karen's harassment. We typed a firm but polite letter, referencing the actual HOA bylaws, demanding she provide legitimate evidence of wrongdoing or face potential legal consequences for defamation. We also hinted we knew the HOA had no legal right to evict me. The next day, I sent it via certified mail to the HOA's office. A week passed with silence, no new letters, no calls, no random passers-by snapping pictures of my yard. I felt a cautious relief. Maybe the letter scared her off, or maybe she realized she was outmatched legally. But then everything exploded in spectacular fashion. One Tuesday morning, I stepped outside to find two official-looking men in suits talking to Karen on her front lawn. She looked distressed, arms waving in frantic gestures. I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but I caught phrases like, "I just need more time," and the notice was supposed to be extended. My heart rate picked up as I realized these men were from a bank or a law firm. Maybe the property was in foreclosure. A minute later, they got back in a black sedan and drove off, leaving Karen seething on her front lawn. We locked eyes for a split second before she stomped back into her house, slamming the door. I mentioned the incident to Alex, who smirked. Bet you $1 she's about to lose her house. That's why she's so desperate to show enforcement action on others, maybe to keep fees rolling in or distract from her own situation. The more I thought about it, the more sense it made. If Karen was behind on her mortgage, she might be using the HOA's power to bully people into paying random fines that she could funnel into her own pockets or use to offset her default. It sounded extreme, but I'd heard of shady HOA presidents pulling similar stunts. Over the next few days, the tension in the neighborhood grew thicker. People started noticing unusual vehicles parked near Karen's driveway, presumably lenders or realtors. I kept my distance, but I also kept my camera handy just in case something notable happened. Late one evening, I saw her packing on the sidewalk, furiously typing on her phone. When she spotted me, she sneered, "Don't get too comfortable in that house. You'll be out soon." I swallowed my anger, forced a half smile, and said, "We both know that's not going to happen." Her face contorted in rage, but she didn't respond. She just marched off into the darkness. About a week later, I woke to find a brand new notice taped to my door, this one more ominous than the rest. It wasn't the usual HOA stationery. It looked more like a legal document, full of bold sections about further noncompliance and eviction proceedings. My stomach lurched. At the bottom, however, I noticed something strange. The file number referred to the local court system, but it was incomplete. The document also lacked an official stamp. And it was signed K. Dunning, HOA President, which was not how a legitimate court order would be signed. I called my attorney in a mild panic, sure that Karen had stooped to forging a legal document. The attorney agreed it looked suspicious and told me to forward a copy immediately. She called me back that afternoon, laughing in disbelief. "This is 100% fake. No court docket, no judge's signature, no official clerk stamp. She basically wrote up a piece of paper to look like a summons. That's illegal, by the way." That was the final push I needed. My attorney filed a complaint against Karen for harassment and forgery, referencing the bogus legal notice. We included every piece of evidence, her letters, the false eviction threats, the new fake summons. She might have gotten away with petty intimidation, but forging a court document was crossing a major line. As if on cue, the next day, 2 police cruisers rolled into the neighborhood, heading straight for Karen's house. I watched from my window, heart pounding, as officers knocked on her door. She emerged looking flustered, still wearing pajamas in the late morning. They talked for a few minutes, then she gestured wildly, pointing toward my house a few times. One officer calmly nodded, taking notes. Then they handed her some papers, likely a citation or a warning. I later learned from a neighbor who had connections at the police station that the officers were indeed investigating her for distributing forged documents. No arrest was made on the spot, but the message was clear. She was in serious trouble. That weekend, everything came crashing down. A real, legitimate eviction notice was served on Karen, except it wasn't from the HOA or me. It was from her mortgage lender. She was apparently months behind on payments, had no workable plan to catch up, and the bank had fast-tracked her foreclosure. Within days, a large sign appeared on her lawn indicating the property was scheduled for auction. She tried to keep it hidden behind a bush, but the news traveled fast. The woman threatening me with fake eviction was about to be kicked out of her own house for failing to pay her mortgage. Some neighbors felt pity for her. Others said it was karmic justice. As for me, I just wanted the harassment to end. Still, the irony was impossible to ignore. Karen had poured so much energy into drumming me out of the neighborhood, and now she was the one facing the real possibility of losing her home. I almost felt sorry for her, but then I'd remember how she'd threatened me with that forged summons, and my sympathy evaporated. On a Monday morning 2 weeks later, a moving truck appeared in front of Karen's property. I peered through my blinds to see workers carrying out furniture, boxes, and various knickknacks. Karen stood on the lawn, arms folded, looking furious and tearful at the same time. By afternoon, the truck was gone and her car vanished too. A rumor circulated that she'd moved into a relative's place in the next county. No one saw her again after that. The foreclosure process advanced quickly, and by the end of the month, an auction sign was posted, along with a realtor's lockbox on the front door. As for the HOA, it went through a rocky transition. Once neighbors realized how Karen had misused her position, sending out bogus notices, forging documents, harassing multiple residents, there was an uproar. The remaining board members tried to distance themselves, claiming they'd had no idea. A special election was held, and a more level-headed neighbor took over as president. The new board apologized to the community, canceled a bunch of questionable fines Karen had imposed, and instituted stricter oversight so no single person could unilaterally declare such wild policies again. In the aftermath, I received a letter from the new HOA board formally retracting all allegations Karen had made against me. They assured me that I was in good standing, that Milo the dog was welcome so long as I followed normal leash laws and city codes, and that my lawn was perfectly acceptable. It was a relief to have it all in writing, though I was still annoyed by the stress and potential legal fees I'd had to deal with. My attorney helped me wrap up the complaint against Karen. Because she'd already vacated the property and faced more pressing legal troubles regarding the forged court document, we decided not to pursue a drawn-out lawsuit for damages. The last thing I wanted was more time and money wasted on her. But the police did keep an open file on the forgery, and I heard she was slated for a hearing at some point. Whether she faced a fine or more serious consequences, I never learned, but I hoped she'd realize the folly of forging official documents. Neighbors slowly returned to normal life. People seemed friendlier, maybe relieved that the neighborhood's reign of terror had ended. I no longer woke up dreading an envelope on my doorstep. I'd see the newly elected HOA president walking the block, greeting everyone with a smile, sometimes accompanied by a fellow board member for transparency. They'd ask politely about any issues we had, not in a threatening manner, but in a genuine spirit of community. It felt like a new era. Eventually, Karen's old house sold to a nice young couple who seemed delighted to be part of the neighborhood. They introduced themselves, said they'd heard a few interesting stories about the former owner, and asked if there was anything they should watch out for regarding the HOA. I laughed and told them not to worry. The problem had resolved itself, and the new leadership was far more reasonable. They seemed relieved, and we ended up talking about local dog parks for Milo. The block, once overshadowed by Karen's constant drama, started feeling warm and welcoming again. Every so often, I still think about how bizarre it was that Karen tried to threaten me with eviction from a house I owned outright, despite her own mortgage delinquency. Perhaps she believed a fierce offense was the best defense, or maybe she hoped to conjure up fines from unsuspecting neighbors to offset her mortgage problems. We'll never know her true motives, but it taught me that bullies in positions of minor authority can wreak real havoc if they go unchecked, and it's crucial to know your rights. A bit of diligence, checking bylaws, verifying city ordinances, seeking legal advice, goes a long way in fending off intimidation. I also learned that HOAs, while sometimes helpful in maintaining property values and communal facilities, can become nightmares if placed in the wrong hands. The good news is that Karen's downfall led to a renewed appreciation for fair, transparent governance among my neighbors. No one wanted a repeat of that fiasco, so we ended up getting more involved. People actually attended HOA meetings, asked questions, and made sure any new rules were clearly communicated. Life now is back to the calm I first enjoyed when I moved here. I'll be out mowing my lawn at the recommended blade height, Milo chasing a squirrel or two, and I'll smile at the memory of Karen's desperate threats. The simplest summary is that the one who tried to evict me ended up evicted herself. Only hers was the real deal, courtesy of a bank, not some made-up letter. If that's not poetic justice, I don't know what is. Thank you so much for listening to this wild saga. If you enjoyed hearing about how the HOA's worst Karen got a taste of her own eviction threat, be sure to like this video, subscribe to Taleflow for more outrageous neighborhood tales, and drop your own HOA war stories in the comments below. Believe me, with neighbors like Karen out there, we'll never run short of insane drama to share. Until next time, keep your paperwork in order, stand up for your rights, and remember, there's no better karma than watching a bully's plan backfire spectacularly.